kunyama muri iki gihe koko buratse nitaba umukiriya wikiriya biteze
ariko tayi aho kusoreza imyenda wibereye kuri telefone kweli
ariko ni kuwa mbere nawe wagwa wambo uracyari wose icyo nakubwiraga wa muntu niko ye umuntu w'umugabo ku bukwe bwe akambara kositimu itukura iciye n'amaboko noneho none se uyisuza
si wombwiye ngo ngwe muse
ntabwo ari ibi navugaga
Wamo kuwa mbere kanda akanyenyeri 345 akanyenyeri 2 urwego maze nawe ugwemo. Wikwisondeka.
Good evening to you all, and thank you for joining us here on Rwanda Television News tonight. We do hope you had yourselves a very productive and a great Thursday. Here's a sneak peek of our edition tonight. A Southern African Development Community SADC summit on Thursday terminated the mandate of the regional bloc's military mission in Eastern DR Congo and directed the commencement of a phased withdrawal of its troops from the country. The Ministry of Emergency Management has urged people to be cautious during this rainy season, as out of 21 people who have lost their lives to disasters since the beginning of 2025, 20 were killed by lightning. And on the international scale, with envoys from the United States in Moscow to ask President Vladimir Putin to sign the ceasefire agreement that was approved between Ukraine and the United States in Jeddah 2 days ago, there have been hope that the war in Eastern Europe could finally come to an end soon. However, the Russian president's rejection of the agreement is proving to be an obstacle. Once again, we're glad to have you company tonight, coming to you straight from the heart of Africa, Kigali. I bring you tonight's edition is Martina Abera. Let us begin by informing you that General M.K. Mubarak, RDF CDS, has led a delegation to the headquarters of the Ethiopian's National Defense Force. The CDS, who was accompanied by Ambassador Charles Karamba, Brigadier General Patrick Karuretwa, and MOD senior officers, signed an MOU on defense cooperation with his counterpart, Field Marshal Birhanu Jula, the Chief of General Staff of the ENDF. A Southern African Development Community summit on Thursday terminated the mandate of the regional bloc's military mission in Eastern DR Congo and directed the commencement of a phased withdrawal of its troops from the country. This came a day after it was announced that direct peace talks between M23 rebels and the DRC government are set to start in Rwanda, Angola, on the 18th of March. RBA's Adam Squizera earlier had an interview with SABC International News editor, who reiterated on these SADC resolutions.
Well, it's always a pleasure to be right here with you on RTV, and I'm joined by Sophie Mokowena, the international news editor of SABC in South Africa, Johannesburg. You are very welcome, Sophie.
Thank you so much.
Well, she joined me in this exclusive interview, which happened right after this extraordinary summit of the heads of state and government of the SADC, which approved some of the resolutions which mainly reiterated on these security issues in DRC. Sophie, without going far, there is the resolution number 12, which stated that on the termination of the SAMI DRC mission in DRC, and they also called the commencement of its withdrawal. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think the resolution is very important. It is very important that we have a peace talks between M23 rebels and the DRC government are set to start in Rwanda, Angola, on the 18th of March. The CDS, who was accompanied by Ambassador Charles Karamba, Brigadier General Patrick Karuretwa, and MOD senior officers, signed an MOU on defense cooperation with his counterpart, Field Marshal Birhanu Jula, the Chief of General Staff of the ENDF. And on the international scale, with envoys from the United States in Moscow to ask President Vladimir Putin to sign the ceasefire agreement that was approved between Ukraine and the United States in Jeddah 2 days ago, there have been hope that the war in Eastern Europe could finally come to an end soon. However, the Russian president's rejection of the agreement is proving to be an obstacle.
What does this mean in this path of finding the lasting solution in Eastern DRC?
Well, I think people have been asking questions in terms of when the troops were deployed, the intention was going to give support to the government of the DRC. And now that the eastern part of the DRC is under control of M23 group, why are we still having the contained, and they are perhaps in the base, they are not doing anything, and they at times struggle to get supply, because you know that the relationship wouldn't be as good as it should be in terms of these people were fighting and they were not on the same side, and therefore the moment has arrived for the SADC region to withdraw its troops. But also you want to demonstrate that as SADC, you are not taking side and you are listening to different voices, with the hope that those who were pushing for the withdrawal will also do their part to ensure that they demonstrate commitment to the peace process and finding lasting solutions to the current problem in the eastern part of the DRC.
Well, this happened right after a month after the joint EAC SADC summit. Should we see this as a result of this summit? This was one of the requests that was made by the heads of state?
Yes, I think it's the implementation of the agreements reached in Tanzania. And you'd recall there was a decision to give the generals to go and look at how you deal with those proposals that were on the table. And I think it's part of the implementation of the EAC SADC meeting, with the hope that this will lead to more implementation of the agreements, so that you are able to finally arrive at a situation where all stakeholders, all those who are affected, are on the table or sitting at the table discussing a lasting solution to the current problem in the DRC.
Well, this even happened a few hours after the mediator, Angola, announced the dates of this peace dialogue between the AFC/M23 and the DRC government. Does this brings us to the pure understanding that the DRC is now understanding that the peace process is viable and should be reliable instead of military solution?
It's like dragging someone to an altar. I think that's how I will describe it. There was no option for the government of the DRC, because you can see that the M23 is advancing, and those forces that were supposed to help them are now in the barracks or in the bases, and they can't help them. Therefore, there are no options. We heard that there was an attempt to get the Americans involved. We saw some allegations that now they are approaching India. And I think all these countries are going to say this is an African solution, and it needs it's an African problem that needs an African solution. So they will be sent back to the regions, EAC and SADC. And I think there are no other options for the DRC. I think the government of President Tshisekedi has accepted that they will have to find a way to resolve this issue amicably, but it wasn't easy. I think it took a lot of convincing and negotiations by the chair of the African Union right now, the president of Angola, who is also a member of the SADC, and therefore I think even different countries behind the scenes had to call President Tshisekedi to persuade him to understand that the only solution is a peace process, and therefore today they were calling for cessation of hostilities and a ceasefire.
Which the DRC didn't comply with.
Yes, stakeholders didn't comply with. Many of those who are involved in this situation didn't comply. And therefore, I think this time around, we are watching whether the DRC government and the M23 and others will be talking, and when they finally agree on cessation of hostilities and ceasefire, will they comply? And unfortunately, with ceasefire, someone has to enforce the ceasefire. We don't know who will take the responsibility of enforcement. And sometimes you have to enforce ceasefire by having a standby force. And I can't see that happening, particularly after the withdrawal of the summit DRC.
Then, do you think this can put an end to this blame game the DRC have been playing for a very long time, of always putting the blame on Rwanda and requesting sanctions?
I don't think so. I think DRC will continue to point out for them what is the cause. And I think it will continue. It's not going to stop. But what is important is cessation of hostilities and ceasefire, so that fighting can stop and you don't continue with loss of life. The blame game, you know, people will do it in any situation. And I can't see him taking a decision now to say, no, I'm not going to blame anybody. I will accept that as a leader, I should have done something right. I remember I spoke to him when he was contesting elections for the first time. He had given assurance that he was going to unite the people of Congo, DRC, but it didn't happen. And I remember at some point in time, the very same M23 had thrown its weight behind his candidature. And later, after 1 year, 9 months, there was a fallout, and here we are.
Well, before concluding, what's the way forward after all these resolutions of this extraordinary summit of the SADC heads of state and the governments, as well as the even other meetings that happened ever before this one?
I think all stakeholders must return back to dusting off a document that was signed at Sun City in South Africa some many years ago. That would have included President Paul Kagame and the then president of the DRC, Joseph Kabila, and other forces to go and implement the decisions that were taken there. If that document can be implemented, the resolution thereof or the recommendations, I think we will see a situation where the DRC is better off. It will still experience challenges because the challenges of the DRC now are too deep, and you have interest parties, not only on the continent, outside the continent as well. But I think the implementation of the Sun City document that had pointed out that the DRC government will not allow the rebel movement or people who fled during the genocide in Rwanda to continue to launch attacks into Rwanda. But secondly, if you don't bring all parties on the table, you are not going to find a lasting solution. If you exclude certain groups, those groups will regroup and they'll recruit and will continue to have instability in the DRC. And therefore, at the end of the day, the Congolese themselves must sit and discuss this problem and find a lasting solution. And they must accept that they are all Congolese.
In 1 minute, what is your anticipation on this upcoming peace dialogue between the M23 and DRC government?
Very difficult. I can't see immediately an agreement. I think it will take time because both parties are going to put on the table some demands. Some of the demands are going to be dismissed by both sides. And therefore, I can't see an immediate agreement. But these kinds of engagements are bringing hope that at some point in time, they will find one another.
Thank you so much, Sophie, for having this time with us.
Thank you.
Thank you to our colleague Adam Squizera for that insightful interview. Now moving over to the Ministry of Emergency Management, who is urging people to be cautious during this rainy season, as out of the 21 people who have lost their lives to disasters since the beginning of 2025, 20 were killed by lightning. The Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of Emergency Management, MINEMA, Philippe Havinshuti, has stated that as the rainy season begins, accompanied by thunderstorms, citizens will have to take extra precautions. MINEMA has reported that last year alone, out of the 191 people who died due to natural disasters and others unfortunate events, 81 were struck by lightning, 49 died in mining accidents, 17 were killed when building collapsed, and 14 lost their lives due to landslides, while others perished in floods and fires. The Rwanda Energy Group, also known as REG, has announced that power outages that occurred on Monday, the 10th of March 2025 and Wednesday, the 12th of March 2025 affected some customers in various areas. These outages had an impact on businesses and essential service providers. The issue was observed not only in Rwanda but also in neighboring countries due to a shared power transmission network. The outages were caused by vandalism targeting key infrastructure within the major electricity transmission network connecting Rwanda and neighboring countries. This interference disrupted the regulation of power grid interconnections in the region. REG has stated that repair work on the affected network is ongoing and is expected to be completed by Monday next week. The company has also given assurance that measures have been taken to prevent similar incidents in the near future. Rwanda is hosting the 13th Academia Public-Private Partnerships Forum 2025, organized by the Inter-University Council for East Africa under the theme Fostering Innovation and Entrepreneurship Through University Partnerships for East Africa's Sustainable Future. William Evans Mutabazi brings us a one-on-one conversation with the Executive Secretary of the Inter-University Council for East Africa on their mandate and strategy frameworks that are launching while they're here.
Thank you very much. Of course, my name is William Evans Mutabazi, and today I'm seated down with Professor Gaspard Banyankimbona, who is the Executive Secretary for Inter-University Council for East Africa. We want to have a conversation about what the mandate of this institution is, but also a bit of detail to some of the documents that they had to launch while in Kigali. Professor, you're most welcome to RTV News.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. My name is Professor Gaspard Banyankimbona, and I'm the Executive Secretary, Inter-University Council for East Africa. It's a specialized institution. Our mandate is advisory in nature. We are charged to advise partner states on all matters related to higher education and university research. It goes up to setting standards in terms of quality assurance, in terms of research, in terms of the quality of the training in higher education.
So someone would wonder, just still in that direction, of course, of harmonizing the education, but also making it better. When you introduce these two documents, I think one is the University Industry Collaboration Support Strategy, and the other is the Research Excellence Framework. What can we say it's going to be their contribution, these two documents, but also how best should they be utilized by member states that also, I think, you have mandate over to make sure that they they deliver to the goal, but also the targets of the Inter-University Council for East Africa?
Thank you very much. I was coming there. The research excellence is to make sure that we assess the whole research process, to make sure that the output of that research in terms of innovation is something that the private sector now will be willing to pick up, and will make sure that the partnership happens.
Professor, as we come to an end of this exclusive, what is your special call to key state partners, but also the private sector? How do you want them to be part of this?
So my understanding is this is a win-win situation, whereby the private sector has its win in this partnership, and the academia is having also a win in this partnership. So I'm urging them to really pick it up from there and open up their doors. That is opening up their doors, because they need each other. They needed to build this kind of trust needed for this to happen. And now, beyond that, then I'm calling upon the policymakers, because either way, being it in academia or being it in private sector, they all need some kind of incentives. So that one can only happen when the private sector, the policymakers are keen to see this happen, so they can make it. Some countries have made it and they are moving forward. So I think we have a lot to learn, and the conversation that is happening in the conference is still ongoing. I believe even ourselves, we are still learning. Probably we shall produce some kind of policy brief to make sure that our call for action is clear and reaches all the stakeholders.
Thank you, Professor Gaspard, for sparing time to speak to us. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Of course, that is Professor Gaspard for you, the Executive Secretary for Inter-University Council for East Africa. William Evans is my name, and thank you for tuning into RTV News.
Heading over to the education sector, the Ministry of Education has held discussions with a team of Malawians from the Chance for Childhood organization that are on a study tour in Rwanda to observe how the country implements inclusive education for students with disabilities in schools. The staff of this organization, which advocates for the rights of people with disabilities in Malawi, is accompanied by officials from Malawi's Ministry of Education. Mathios Compare, an education official in this ministry, has stated that he and his team have learned a lot that they will share with those back home.
Back to our country is back to the drawing board. We are going to be discussing the model that we have seen here in Rwanda. For example, we have seen inclusive schools. We are not shameful to tell you that we don't have an inclusive school in Malawi. Of course, we have got special schools, we have got mainstream schools, but here we have seen an inclusive school whereby learners with disabilities are learning with the learners without disabilities, and the learners with disabilities are being supported very well. That is a model that myself and my colleagues are taking home. We're going to sit down and see how best we can start an inclusive school.
The representative of the Chance for Childhood organization in Rwanda, Félicien Turatsinze, has pointed out that there are lessons some countries should learn from Rwanda.
First of all, Malawians were eager to come to Rwanda to learn about screening and assessment of children with disabilities. So that's one. And Chance for Childhood is the expert in that. We've been doing this over the 10 years we've been here. And the second thing they want to learn is also about how the policies are done in Rwanda, and the strategies are developed and how they are all implemented. So that's how they've been able to visit, be it the districts, the schools, and the Ministry of Education. We are visiting a REP tomorrow and NESA. So all that will help them learn how policies and strategies are developed and implemented.
Meanwhile, Rose Maguma, the head of the Education Policy Department at the Ministry of Education, has urged everyone to safeguard the progress made in inclusive education.
The delegation appreciated a lot about what we presented. You had they mentioned they don't have inclusive schools in Malawi, but they're on the journey to have inclusive schools. Though they're happy to see the organization itself, the coordination, how the ministry is organized, and how we work with different partners in education. So they appreciate a lot.
Some of Rwanda's achievements in inclusive education include constructing infrastructure that accommodates people with various disabilities and training teachers to deliver such education. Heading over to the next story, the Rwanda Defense Force and the Rwanda National Police, in collaboration with other institutions, are set to launch activities aimed at supporting citizens in social welfare and development. The initiatives are designed to strengthen the partnership between citizens and security agencies in celebration of the 31st Liberation Anniversary and 25 years of collaboration with the Rwanda National Police. The role of the RDF and Rwanda National Police in national development and social welfare is outlined in the laws governing the institutions. The activities will take place across the country over 3 months, focusing on various sectors to improve citizens' well-being. Key areas of intervention include healthcare, environmental conservation, infrastructure development, livestock farming, and housing support for vulnerable families.
icyo mbaza ni kimwe koko hari umuntu ugihagarara ku nyama muri iki gihe koko uretse nitaba umukiriya kiriya biteze
ariko tayo aho kusoreza imyenda wibereye kuri telefone kweli
ariko ni kuwa mbere nawe wagwa wango uracyari wose icyo nakubwiraga wa muntu niko ye umuntu w'umugabo ku bukwe bwe akambara kositimu itukura iciye n'amaboko noneho none se uyisuza
si wombwiye ngo ngwe muse
ntabwo ari ibi navugaga
wamo kuwa mbere kanda akanyenyeri 345 akanyenyeri 2 urwego maze nawe ugwemo. Wikwisondeka.
Thank you for keeping it on RTV News, and welcome back to other stories making headlines on the international scene. Heading over to Ukraine, with envoys from the United States in Moscow to ask President Vladimir Putin to sign the ceasefire agreement that was approved between Ukraine and the United States in Jeddah 2 days ago. There had been hope that the war in Eastern Europe could finally come to an end soon. However, the Russian president's rejection of the agreement is proving to be an obstacle. VOA with the details.
The Ukrainians have accepted to enter into immediate negotiations to end this conflict in a way that's enduring and sustainable and accounts for their interests, their security, their ability to prosper as a nation. We'll take this offer now to the Russians, and we hope that they'll say yes, to peace. So the shooting will stop, the killing will stop, the dying will stop, and the talks can begin about how to end this war permanently in a way that's acceptable and enduring for both sides. If they say no, then we'll unfortunately know what the impediment is to peace here.
President Trump started this diplomatic effort in the Oval Office, talking to both leaders, both President Putin and President Zelensky back to back. And now we've gone from if the war is going to end to now how the war is going to end. this was an important first step. And that was under President Trump's leadership. As a result of this positive step forward, the president has decided to lift the pause on aid and on our security assistance to Ukraine going forward. And that's effective immediately.
The goal here is peace. That's the president's goal.
The state of Texas has the third largest Asian American population in the U.S. Chinese Americans in the Lone Star State have roots that trace back for generations, just like those of their counterparts on the nation's east and west coasts. While the history of these Texans might not be as well known, their stories are just as intertwined with America's. VOA once more.
In this library at Rice University in Houston, the stories of Asian Texans are waiting to be unboxed. The Houston Asian American Archive includes some 500 first-hand accounts of Asian immigrants and their descendants.
My father came from China. Oral history gives you a sense of immediacy.
Unlike many of their counterparts, these Asian Americans ventured away from cities like San Francisco and even New York to settle much further south. Among the artifacts are pieces of Albert G's life.
Albert G. CACA plaque.
His daughter, Linda Wu, has kept some of her father's photos.
To the White House for a state dinner. My dad was born here in the United States. His father and mother had a laundry.
When G's father died in 1927, he went to China with his mother and siblings, but he returned to the U.S. with his godfather a few years later.
Albert found himself only around 11 years old, coming back to the United States.
G eventually ended up in Houston with the help of friends and relatives. Here he opened restaurants, which attracted Hollywood celebrities who would stay at a nearby hotel.
Bob Hope.
G also helped other new Chinese immigrants settle. As established families helped newcomers from China, the number of G's grew in Houston. Not all who shared the G name were related. Recorded in this book are some of their stories, including that of Rogine G. Calvert's father, David G. He came to the U.S. at age 17 in the late 1920s as a so-called paper son.
At that time, we had the Chinese Exclusion Act,
which banned many Chinese from immigrating to the U.S.
Paper sons and paper daughters are the name given to people who buy false papers.
They were rightfully looking for people that were breaking the law, and unfortunately my dad was one.
After being detained for almost a year at the Angel Island Immigration Station in San Francisco, California, Calvert's father was granted permission to stay. He eventually married and settled in Houston, Texas. He worked in the grocery business with the help of other G's. Chow says the first large group of Chinese immigrants arrived in Houston in the 1940s and 50s. Racial segregation was legal in Texas and southern states through a series of codes known as Jim Crow laws.
Even though Houston also was subject to Jim Crow law, the law wasn't applied the same way as the other southern states. And so there's a sense of more equity in Houston. That's where people come, a sense of business opportunity.
Restaurateur Albert G. took part in desegregating Houston's eateries. His work in the community would eventually be immortalized years later in a web comic developed by Asia Society Texas.
Kids all across the state of Texas are reading the comic. Our Asian American students in particular said they want to see themselves represented.
Asia Society Texas also worked with the Houston Asian American Archive to develop lesson guides for teachers in the state so students can explore further the history of the Asian Americans who make up the fabric of the city. Elizabeth Lee, VOA News, Houston.
And that VOA story marks the end of our bulletin tonight. But before we close off, let's have a recap of our headlines. A Southern African Development Community summit on Thursday terminated the mandate of the regional bloc's military mission in Eastern DR Congo and directed the commencement of a phased withdrawal of its troops from the country. The Ministry of Emergency Management has urged people to be cautious during this rainy season, as out of the 21 people who have lost their lives to disasters since 2025 began, 20 were killed by lightning. On the international scale, with envoys from the United States in Moscow to ask President Vladimir Putin to sign the ceasefire agreement that was approved between Ukraine and the U.S., there had been hope that the war in Eastern Europe could finally come to an end soon. However, Russia's president's rejection of the agreement is proving to be an obstacle. And on that note, we have come to the end of our bulletin tonight. On behalf of the news production team as well as the technical team, thank you for sticking with us on RTV News. Until next time, stay safe and have a good night.